Well, you know, as a community of researchers, the Academy has always been particularly concerned about building our skills in taking evidence to policy. It's an important area. It's a challenge in the best of development circumstances, and even more so in ours. We're working across sectors. We have to bring evidence to very different groups of stakeholders, different ministries, different organizations in order to move forward the agriculture, nutrition, and health opportunities arising from the research that we do. So it's very appropriate that our masterclass today is on translating research into policy. And I think we're very lucky in having a real research leader in that area to give us that masterclass. Purnima Menon is a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute based here in India, with many years of experience in the development and evaluation of interventions for nutrition, and particularly working with stakeholders and policymakers to bring that evidence into actual policy, and the research that's been done on how that works and how that works best. And today she's going to share with us some of her experiences in that, and I think a bit of an interactive presentation. Look forward to that, and happy to invite you, Purnima, to deliver our masterclass this morning.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you all so much for having me here today. As I was reflecting on preparing this, I realized that actually my first job out of my master's, not even out of my PhD, was with someone who was trying to bring research to policy in India with Dr. C. Gopalan. So, you know, it's not been just a few years. I think it's been more like 25 years. While I'm getting that up, I'd like to invite you all to please go to our website, www.menti.com, and I'll give you the code for the poll that I'm going to do in a minute. But if you can just go to the website, www.menti.com. All right, so the question that we are discussing and that I hope to share some experiences with you today on is this issue of taking evidence to policy. And so, I think the question here is, okay, so we researchers, and I think this room is mostly full of researchers and research communicators, want to influence policy. What I'd like to do, because this is a learning lab, is I do have a couple of learning objectives. So the first is to draw both on the literature on taking evidence to policy, and on some of the experiences that we have had and the things that I've learned along this journey, to think about how we as researchers can actually strengthen the links between what we do and what the policy community out there does. I also hope by sharing some of what we've done in our work in India in particular, to inspire us in a sense that when we choose, sometimes as researchers, we don't want to engage with policy. We just want to do our own research. But when we choose to do it, that we can be mindful about it. The case study that I'll share with you today is from our work on an initiative called POSHAN, which is an evidence to policy initiative, and which we started work on in India in 2011. And at this point, I think our only metric for success is that everyone confuses us now with the government's National Nutrition Program, which is also called POSHAN Abhiyan. I want to acknowledge some people as we get going. So as a researcher and a learner myself, I've been really fortunate to have had many different people sort of help me understand how this research to policy link works, and who've been sort of co-conspirators, supporters, some even a little mafia-like. I don't know if you recognize the conference Sunita in there. So in 1994, right after I finished my master's, I began work with Dr. C. Gopalan, who is the father of nutrition in India and established the National Institute of Nutrition. And one of the things that what he was trying to do then was actually this was pre-internet and all of those things. So, he was reading scientific articles and journals that would come to him, and then preparing something called the Bulletin of the Nutrition Foundation of India, which in a sense was putting global research in the Indian policy context, and that was a bit of an aha moment for me after a master's that was very sort of scientific, and I had started to see public health, but I had never seen policy. And I worked with him to edit that bulletin, and that bulletin still does exactly that. So that was my first inroad into policy. And then I had the chance to work with Lawrence Haddad, whose name is on the bottom there. And Lawrence was just very kind. I happened to move to the US with my parents, and he opened doors for me at IFPRI to just come in and do a bit of an internship. And I learned a lot from him then, and we have continued to work together in the last 25 years on taking research to policy. At Cornell, Ed Frangillo, David Pelletier, and I were involved in an initiative called the Mainstreaming Nutrition Initiative, and the core of that was really trying to understand how policy agendas moved in nutrition. And subsequently after that at IFPRI, worked with Stuart Gillespie, with Sunita, with Rasmi, Mamta Pradhan, Shruti, a whole, so many people, Harold Alderman. I've gotten to see what the craft of taking research to policy looks like, because this is a group of people, a group of researchers who are in an institute that not just encourages us, but actually actively supports us in that translation. In India, I had the good fortune to encounter very soon after I moved here those people you see in that very mafia-like photo on the left. But we're a group of people that try to bring attention to stunting and linear growth in particular as an issue. And what's really fun about that picture is that those 5 people in the room include a policymaker, a civil society activist, a donor, and 2 researchers, and it was a really interesting and fun journey in a sense of trying to figure this landscape out. All right, so now I'd like us to do the little audience poll, because I want us to think about these 2 questions. What do we think of when we think of research, and what do we think of when we think of policy? So you can start thinking about that, and go to menti.com. All right, okay. So go to menti.com, use the code 37178, and just start typing in. This is an open-ended response. Great, okay. I have 0 respondents so far. Type faster. Rigor. Inquiry, academic papers, knowledge generation, academic data, rigor. Whoa, rigor. People care a lot about rigor. Headache. Humility, some interesting things here. Science, data analysis, journal articles, looking behind what exists. Great, so let's take a pause. So I think what I've taken away from this is that some critical words such as rigor, knowledge generation, evidence, people still use the word evidence when you think of research, you think of evidence. Journal articles, science, data, right? We're going to go to the next question now. Oops, if I can get that to work. Okay, what do you think of when you hear the words policy? Implementation, government, meetings, regulation, government, action, change, politics, negotiation. Wow. Pragmatic translation of research, corruption, macro level, interesting. Values, power, money. Eyeballed decisions, that's a good one, that's a new one. Policy is an eyeballed decision. I didn't say that. Don't quote me on that. People's lives, directive will, law. Great. Well, thank you all for contributing to the poll. That was my first experience at using Menti, by the way. All right, so I think what I've seen from there, and I hope what all of you saw from there, is we're a bunch of researchers in the room. And even when I asked you to say, what do you think about research, different people said different things. And then when I asked you to say, what do you think is policy, different people said different things. So research and evidence really take different and many shapes, as do the researchers and their tools. So in our work in India, what we've tried to do is we've tried to bucket the way in which we think about research and how it's positioned. So we bucket it by some of the themes and the ways of looking at the challenge of malnutrition. So we say we do a bucket of work that's on the challenge and who's affected by what and in what areas and groups. We do a bucket of work on the drivers of malnutrition, what factors drive outcomes, what factors drive change over time. And then we do a bucket of work that's on solutions, who's reached by current solutions, current policy solutions, what is the impact of new solutions, what is the impact of the old solutions. And we use different methods to do this, right? So this is the toolkit that we as researchers have, has to be suited in a sense to the work we do. So if you're trying to talk to people about the challenge, we use methods that are very sort of entry methods in a sense. They're descriptive analyses of the burden of the trends. You can extend that to the work that other people are doing in terms of the consequences of that burden. When we do work on determinants, we do regression analyses. We also do mixed methods and grounded studies, ethnographies that help us understand how and what kinds of things drive the nature of malnutrition. And on solutions, again, we do descriptive analyses of public data sets. We do regression analyses to look at determinants of who's reached by what. And finally, of course, we do what I think is often the most comfortable space for evidence for many researchers, which is evaluation research, so the testing of new solutions. Policy takes many shapes too, and we'll come to the lessons and to the way that I've framed the presentation later, but one of the critical things is the research community needs to understand what policy processes look like and what the stages of moving something to policies are, because that's what helps us understand where to kind of intersect and insert the evidence. So the agenda, there's a stage in policy called agenda setting, which is where people start to recognize or decide that something is a challenge. You can move from agenda setting to saying, okay, I'm going to do something about this challenge and develop a strategy to do so. You can move from there to say, okay, now I'm going to put some money behind that strategy and actually get something moving. Once you do that, somebody has to actually do the work of delivering on the strategy. And finally, there has to be some kind of a review or a reflection or a lesson learning on how we are doing. Now, the beauty of this is that research fits completely into every part of the cycle. It's just that when something is happening is when the research needs to be available, right? So we as researchers need to understand and appreciate where on the issue we are doing research on, a country government or an NGO or anybody else is on that policy cycle. And you can apply this kind of policy cycle as micro, as someone planning a program in a district or a small set of communities, to a national government, or sometimes even a global policy community. There's also many different actors in the policy community. So I think I'm trying to move us towards saying, let's not just say the word policy makers. Let's really think of the people out there who make decisions about all of these things related to programs and issues as the policy community. So they are politicians, bureaucrats, technocrats, implementation managers, development partners, public health practitioners, activists, journalists, the media, frontline workers, and of course the people of any country or context that you're worried about. So we, as researchers, with many tools and our many ways of thinking about the world, need to bring what we are doing and the findings of what we are doing to what is also a very diverse world of people doing many different things in policy. So I want us to keep these two things in mind, the researchers and our tools and our community and the policy community, not so much policy makers. So what does policy actually mean if you think about an issue, right? So let's just take, for example, the issue of stunting. So when I came to India in 2008, sorry, let me step back. So the four things that I think need to happen when people think about acting on a policy issue is you need to recognize that there's a problem. You need to align. So the policy community, that large group of people, really needs to align on the drivers and on the solutions. They need to act. So that whole cycle from strategy development to financing to implementation. And then the entire policy community needs to learn, right? So when I came to India and the Lancet Nutrition series hadn't come out, but the new National Family Health Survey data had come out in 2007, and I came to India in February 2008, and the biggest discussion then was stunting is not a problem in this country. Those standards don't apply to Indian children. The WHO standards are questionable. Indians, this is not a big problem. And so we had a situation where, despite a lot of evidence being available, there just wasn't even alignment of the policy and the research community around the recognition of the problem. I think the Lancet Nutrition series coming in, helped a lot. So I think it was maybe in 2008-09 that the policy community sort of agreed that fine, we can broadly agree on stunting as a challenge, but there were still people questioning that. But there was no alignment on drivers. So what happened after the NFHS data came out in India is everyone in the world started analyzing the data. So you had some of us saying, listen, it's a multifaceted problem. You can't just pinpoint a magic bullet. But then you had Dean Spear's work that basically said, no, it's all about sanitation. A year or so after that, there was work by Rohini Pandey and Seema Jayachandran that said, no, it's all about gender and gender discrimination. And there were some of us going, no, it's truly a multifaceted problem, right? And then, so you had to come to sort of acceptance and alignment and then decide to act on something and finally decide to monitor. And we're now at a space, so these 4 dots have probably been 7, 8, 10-year journey on bringing attention to stunting as an important issue for India. Now, what happens is that there is, and that's my arrow at the bottom there, there's also an ever-evolving scientific base now on any and all of these, whether it's on the problem and how important it is, whether it's on the drivers, whether it's on what policy instruments make. And so those of us who care about bringing evidence to policy actually need to be able to keep up with this evolving base of evidence and help in our own ways to sometimes translate that. So I'd really like us to keep these things in mind. What do we mean by research? What do we mean by policy and the policy cycle? And what is the journey that an issue has to go through to go from, to actually move into policy, right? Issue recognition all the way to acting, investing, and more. So the case study, so that was the first part of the talk. The case study that I'd like to sort of draw on some examples, it's not sort of an exhaustive overview of the case study, is from a program of work that we manage in India. It's called POSHAN, and it spells out into partnerships and opportunities to strengthen and harmonize actions for nutrition. Sunita and I probably hammered that out after a glass of wine somewhere, I don't know. But it's a knowledge and evidence initiative that we developed in 2011. And there are at least 5 people in this room who know a lot about POSHAN and the development of it. So I'm going to take a pause and ask you guys to please stand up. Rasmi? Here? Sunita? You were involved in the design. Is Shruti here? Shruti, Mamta? Yes, there you go. Shruti's in the back. And I don't know if Mamta's here. So this conference has been a pretty amazing reunion for us, actually. So we started it with the idea of supporting policy and program decisions and actions on nutrition, so a broad range of policy actions with multiple forms of data and evidence. So it wasn't about taking the results of one study to one policymaker, but it was intended to inform and engage the larger community. It was initiated by a small group at IFPRI, so there's 4 of us in that top right corner who started work on it and developed the strategy with some of our partners. On the left side there is the team as it exists now. We're hanging out with a bunch of turtles there. And then we also now have a lot of other people at IFPRI in our division who've come together around this and really support the initiative from wherever they are. We have many, many, many partners now who work with us in India, either formal or informal. So it's not that every partner has an MOU, it's just we have a shared commitment to work together on things, people like Rohini who are in the room here, UNICEF, et cetera. We do a lot of work with people without administrative strings around it. I know this is busy, but this is what an 8-year journey of a policy to evidence agenda looks like. On the left side there is 2011, on the right side here is 2019. And so we spent almost the first year and a half of our work simply doing inception research. We tried to understand who the stakeholders were, who is the policy community, who's influential, what issues do they care about, what issues does the data suggest they should care about, what is the availability of evidence on program and policy actions, et cetera. So we spent a lot of time at the beginning just trying to understand the policy community and decide what we would do from a strategic perspective. And then from there on out, so from about 2013 onwards, we've just been actually doing what we set out to do at that point in time. And things have been evolving and shaping depending on, again, what some of the data was saying and what we were hearing back from the policy community. We had several touch points of connecting with people. We had a large tag in the first phase of our work. That really helped us to build our stakeholder community as well. And today we are in 2019, where we actually have an official role of supporting the National Nutrition Mission in India with data and evidence with an MOU with the government. So what is the kind of work that we do? So we use a wide range of tools in our research work. So we work a lot with large data sets, not just to answer the question on what's driving India's burden of malnutrition, but actually to tell the story in a descriptive way as well, sometimes to just help people see what does that framing of the problem, the determinants, and the reach of solutions look like in your state, in your district, at the national level. We are researchers and we love our publications, of course, so we also do a lot of work with large data sets that is about putting papers into public domain. We do several implementation research studies, again, using really methods that are fit for purpose. Some of them are straight up traditional impact evaluations and RCTs, but some others are sometimes even really quick studies. So we've looked at issues that were important to the policymakers when we started looking at convergence between two sectors, service delivery. We've done rapid assessments. We did some work in a state government and they were like, oh, would you come out and look at this little piece of how we are doing on our growth monitoring program? And we literally sometimes have had to mobilize in 2 to 3 weeks to just go out there and do some of that research. So that's a whole body of implementation research using these different methods. And then we have a piece of work we do on nutrition financing where we do just one tiny part of that. So every year we do a little estimate using the global methods of nutrition costing to say how much should India be spending on nutrition interventions. And then we work with a range of other financing research and advocacy partners who do the rest of it. They analyze the budget allocations, they work with state governments, they analyze how those allocations to state governments are used, et cetera. So we have, for the last 4 or 5 years now, had a community of about 10 or 15 researchers and advocates who work on nutrition financing. So that's quite a different bucket of our work. And then on engagement, we do 2 types of things. One is we really try to get the evidence out to people using multiple methods. And the second body of work is really on helping people a little bit more to build capacity to actually use evidence. And that was a big lesson for us after the first phase of work, which is that we can write and do all kinds of things. But in fact, if the policy community is not savvy, is not understanding really how to look at data and how to look at evidence, it's just really not connecting, right? So we do a lot of typical things in our engagements. We have a website, we have a blog, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, and actually now we have WhatsApp, because this is a new thing in the nutrition policy community in India. We're on I don't know, I'm on at least 2 or 3 WhatsApp groups that actually have about 250, 300 people on them. And so it's a great way to just send papers and engage in conversation with a very wide range of people. We have a set of regular publications, and one of the things that I want to call out is something called our Abstract Digest. So the Abstract Digest is where we share all the evidence that all of you and other people in the room put out into the world. We curate and package that and get it to other people. Because one of the things we decided very explicitly in our strategy was that evidence was not just the study that we had done. Evidence was what our community of researchers was producing. So if anyone wants to engage with us on that, and just keep sending us your work, and we'll pull it into the Abstract Digest. We also do a lot of work with the media, have our basic publications and things like that. On building capacity to interpret evidence, this is a tough one because the policy community is very, very, very large. In a country as big as India, it is incredibly large. So we've done some things that I think we think are sort of strategic. We've partnered with the National Training Academy for Civil Servants and developed with them not a short course on teaching anyone who comes into the civil service, all the way from people who will enter service at the district level to people who will serve in higher level government positions. And we found ways to integrate nutrition into the trainings. They come back to their training academy repeatedly. And so we've been working with the academy and with a group called EPOD, which is based at Harvard. And then the second piece of work that we're doing there is we've collaborated with 3IE, who've been working very hard to update the evidence review that we did back in 2012 and do it using new research methods. So it creates an implementation research gap map, right? So that's the initiative. I wanted you to have an overview of that before we move on to the third part of the talk, which is on lessons. So I'm going to completely cop out here because these are not my lessons. But I was really thrilled to read this paper, and actually I did put it on the resources for this session. It's a paper led by someone called Catherine Oliver, who's at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And what I loved is that she got evidence-based about what researchers can do about taking evidence to the policy community. So it's a brilliant read. I think it's a must read at this point if you're a researcher. And it's also written in a way that's really engaging. But what she and her co-author did is actually do a systematic review of of experiences, in a sense, with taking evidence to policy, and then they distilled 8 lessons from that. So I'm going to walk through those 8 lessons and use a few of our case examples from our work in POSHAN. So the key principles that they articulate is, first and foremost, researchers need to do high-quality research. Second, we need to make our research relevant, readable. Third, we need to understand policy processes. Fourth, we need to be accessible to the policy community. Fifth, we need to decide if we want to be an issue advocate or if you want to be an honest broker. You need to know how to build relationships or find ways to make the connect between us and the policy community. We need to be entrepreneurial. So there's something about needing to stay on top of things and know what evidence might be useful at this point. And we need to reflect continuously. Should we engage? I think this is a question researchers should ask ourselves. Not everybody wants to. Not everybody needs to. But if you want to, you should reflect on whether what you're doing is working, right? So I want to walk through each of these 8 principles with us. So the first principle is do high-quality research. And I think on that one, it is so clear that the research community actually has a metric for how we judge whether we're doing high-quality research or not. So the metric that we have sort of internalized even on our work is peer-reviewed publication, right? And in a sense, even though IFPRI is this sort of policy organization or an organization that cares to engage with policy, the idea that our research stands up to peer-reviewed scrutiny is something that's really drilled into people people in our organization. And so this is an easy one for us as researchers, and it's what we do. It's our daily bread and butter. But I think for those researchers who are in a policy setting or a policy context, sometimes we can get sloppy. You think, oh, it's a policymaker, they don't care. But actually, they do care, and it does make a difference where sometimes even where that research is published. So our approach is also we should apply similar standards even for some of the descriptive work we are doing that's not necessarily going to be peer review published, right? So the principles of transparency, of investing in quality, of replicability, so somebody needs to be able to come in and redo what I've done, even on a descriptive product, and find the same thing, communicating and presenting. So this is a paper that we did on anemia, and I'll just sort of walk through that example in a few other things as we go along. So the first principle, I think that's an easy one for all of us. The second principle is make your research relevant and timely, and this is where, relevant and readable, and this is where I think researchers can really do with a lot of help. We write 100-page reports, we write 10,000-page journal articles, we write them in a language that's unique to our field. A nutritionist can sometimes not understand an economist's paper, an economist will not understand our paper, and so, but we have to do that for our careers. So I want to first talk about making the research relevant, right? So you've published the research. That research sits out there. It becomes relevant when it highlights something that's of geographic or national importance, when it's sometimes of just personal interest to somebody with some energy in our policy community. It's sometimes very timely. It's an issue that somebody has recognized, and then a piece of research comes on that's just ripe for the moment. But I think the challenge to us on the research community is, can we create the relevance? Can we create a window of opportunity? Can we force a discussion around a set of things that our community of people has decided is important? And I think the resounding answer, in my view, to that question is yes. It is yes, and we have done it. This group of people has done it. You have put agriculture and nutrition linkages on the map. The folks who put together the various Lancet series have done that. They put nutrition on the map. So I think we forget that sometimes we have a lot of power in actually creating discourse by doing research and by doing it together. But sometimes old research can be very relevant in the context of policy cycles. And so if you have people who are in a policy cycle and you hear a set of questions being asked, if you know your field, you can more often than not bring more evidence to somebody at the right time in a policy context. Now making research readable, right? So you have that 100-page report, you have your 10,000-word article. There are many different ways that you can actually make that more readable. So you can do a blog, usually about 1,000 words. You can do a media op-ed, which takes your 5,000, puts a story or something personal on it, 600 to 700 word. You have what many of us do, many of our organizations do, policy briefs, data briefs, infographics. But you can also do creative things. You can do a video message. You can do a one slide on papers. One of the things that we've learned is that people love PowerPoint. Like, people truly love PowerPoint. They want slides that they can use in their presentations. And so one of the things we do with every piece of research is try to do these one slide, two slide versions of important pieces of work, because then people can use that in their slides. And we share it with people with no branding, just a little citation somewhere in the bottom. And then, sometimes they'll use it even with the citation removed, but that's fine. You can use WhatsApp text messages. You can also do tweet threads. So this is happening a lot in the economics world now. There's a lot of economists on Twitter, and they do some fantastic tweet threads on their papers, which is good because econ papers are really too long. So these are some of the things that we do in India with our work. These are sort of POSHAN's readable knowledge products. This is not our peer-reviewed work, but some of the peer-reviewed work gets translated into it. So we do some reports sometimes, if they're on issues that we don't necessarily want to write a journal manuscript on. We do policy notes that are focused predominantly on geography. So if you work in any state in India, you will find a policy note that describes the state of malnutrition in your state. We then stripped even more text out of our readable products, and we went just to data products. So we have several data products, again, that are state-focused and issue-focused. And then we also have a series of products called district nutrition profiles. But what have we learned from all of this? This is to help us. I am yet to meet a policymaker who has, or really even people in the policy community writ large, who really read our stuff and say, that was really great, In a sense, I feel like the policy brief or the policy writing, the preparation of these short products that we do, they're to help us distill our messages and to have something that's a little more accessible for people in the policy community to read, because they are not going to read our academic papers. We found that in most cases, especially policymakers, so now this is really government officials, they just don't have the time to read. So if you just go and hang out in somebody's office for a day, you know what their day looks like. This is not a day that has much time for reading in it. But what we found is that when we create these kinds of products, when you make things that look a little bit nicer than a journal article, that are easy to hand out and colorful and all of that, we can still engage people by using these kinds of products in addition to our research papers. And definitely some of them are interested in reading, but that's really rare. So in our case, we use these sort of more jazzy products in various communication endeavors and in teaching and things like that. This is an example of the anemia paper that I showed you that was published in BMJ Global Health. We distilled that paper into just one slide so that anyone who's working on anemia, and now we have one of our WhatsApp groups is the anemia campaign WhatsApp group. And so, people will have access to these kinds of things. And so all we did there was we didn't, there's nothing in here on objectives, research methods, nothing. There's the question that we're asking right at the top. That's the objectives of the paper, the key findings, this one single graphic from the paper that we wanted people to pay attention to, and then a one-liner on the implications of this. And so what we are trying to do is for every journal article that we publish, we do a one-slide version as well. This is my predominant experience in policy engagement, though, right? Once people know that you exist, or indeed, once a policymaker knows that somebody exists who knows something about something, the number one thing people do is send a WhatsApp message today or make a phone call. And so if you're an active researcher and a knowledgeable researcher in a policy community, sometimes you can become the ghostbuster, right? You get a phone call, it's like, hey, so I heard about this, what do you think about this? And so the most important thing that we need to know is we need to know what to say in that moment. And sometimes what I need to say is, you know what, I'm not the expert on that topic, let me connect you with someone who is. Or if the policymaker needs an answer now, I say, let me call them and I'll call you back, but I'm not the person with expertise on this. But if you're, especially I think, for those of you who are national researchers and working in your country context, you will at some point become the nutrition ghostbuster. And you gotta know how to answer those questions. So these are ways in which we communicate and engage with policymakers, right? So the range of things to do around that second principle of making research relevant and readable, in a sense, has also expanded now from our old model of research to, say, policy brief or website, to all these other ways of engaging. So we've gone over the policy process cycle. I think I want to encourage those of you who are interested in this. There's actually now a really substantial literature on nutrition and policy processes, including stuff that's summarized in the Lancet Series 2013, paper 4, but also a whole lot of work done subsequently. People like Ed, Jody Harris, several people who are in the room and in this group here have been working on these. So people have been studying this now. It's an active field of study or a subfield of study in nutrition. So I encourage us to look at that. And I think mostly people have been working on issues related to agenda setting, strategy development, and then what happens from strategy development to implementation. So now there's actually a lot of research. David Pelletier's work, especially now on the complexity, in a sense, of multi-sectoral processes. These are important reads for us as a research community. The temporality of a policy cycle really matters for what evidence is useful at what point in time. Along all of those sort of stages in the policy cycle, there's a temporality. So agenda setting usually happens pre-election, in the very immediate stage, right after election. It may happen mid-tenure, and it may happen again end tenure of a government. But it's not something that happens all the time. So, as a research community, we just need to be ready. And there's a set of people there who deal with agenda setting. They're not your technical people inside ministries of health, but they're political leaders, ministers, strategy advisors, national planning bodies. The people who work on strategy development end up being technocrats and bureaucrats. Usually that work happens in the first year or so of a new government. Financing is always aligned with budget cycles. If you know the budget cycle in your context, you know when to start talking to people about financing. Other things such as implementation and learning just end up being ongoing. But really, that list of people on the right side is a very large body of people who are the policy community. So one of the things we did in our work in POSHAN was do some active mapping of the policy community. This is a policy community in one state in India. It doesn't really depict the relationship between that state and the national government. But the only thing that we could take away from this was that it was actually a very tightly connected policy community in this case, and this was a policy community for nutrition in Orissa. It was large and diverse, but it was very well connected, and we were able to use that, the extent of that connectedness to rally our work. Principle 4 that Catherine talks about is being accessible to policymakers. We covered a little bit of that already, engaging routinely, flexibly, and humbly. And so the range of accessibility can go all the way from just being, answering your phone to sometimes somebody saying, can you come over to my office at 5 o'clock today? And that's a tough one. Or can you come over this week? We need to be super flexible with how we engage because it really depends on what they need at that point in time. Sometimes it can be just send me a paragraph, I need to insert something into something else. I think humility is something that the research community can learn a lot because we are a community actually with a fair degree of ego. Each of us likes our work, our methods, our way of thinking about the world, but sometimes we just have to be able to tell policymakers, we haven't done that work, but we know other people who've done that work. Issue advocate or honest broker. We've taken the strong positionality of being an honest broker, and part of that means telling people that the data is bad when the data is bad, telling people that the data is missing when the data is missing. People often, because they care about an issue and they don't want that issue to fall off this is the policymakers, and they don't want that issue to fall off the radar screen of their masters, they will look for any data to justify that what they're doing is the right kind of data. We as researchers need to not, ideally we should just not do that. Building relationships, building ground rules with policymakers. I love that part of Catherine's review, but really I just don't know, how we build any ground rules. There's many different ways to build relationships with policymakers or with the policy community, but I think what we should just really all keep in mind is that very often they care exactly about the things we care about, the broader policy community. There may be politicians or a few people here and there who have other motives, but broadly folks working do want to make the world a better place, and if we can help them do that, we at least have a set of shared values. There's many different ways of building relationships. They're human beings just like we're human beings, and I think we just have to build that relationship at a human level. For us, this is one of our very successful cases of a set of relationships that was built. This was the short course that we designed for for district administrators at the National Training Academy. The first one we built was just us together with the Training Academy. And in the next one, we brought together the National Policy Think Tank, and then it was financed by a ministry. It was a whole different set of challenges to work on something that then suddenly had a lot of people involved and a lot of government processes involved around financing and things like that. But the fact that we worked together on something that they cared about, that we cared about, and that delivered something at the end was really helpful. Be entrepreneurial or find someone who is. Now, one of the features about researchers is that we're often, you're more likely to find more introverts in the research world than extroverts. And that makes it hard when our job is to communicate and engage with other people. But it's helpful if we know the community and if we know the other people out there and we use those. So if you know the researcher who's always out there, if you know the policy community member who's accessible, if you know who the advisor of the year is, every government, every policy group has advisors of the year. using policy, social media sometimes. If you're not comfortable going and engaging with people directly, you can always tag them on social media. That's being done a lot. And then building communities. So we as researchers actually have tremendous power to bring people together around ideas, around things that we think are important. And by bringing people together around a particular issue, we can figure out who are the entrepreneurial ones in that who are going to help take that issue forward. And then last but not least, reflecting on what we should do and how we should do it. So the way we do it is we have weekly meetings just of the people who do the policy engagement work. And so we are reflecting and touching base continuously on whether what we are doing is working. We have several people in the policy community who watch out, who hear things and will tell us something is off, or maybe this is the direction you need to move in. You can also commission an evaluation. So on POSHAN, we commissioned in different sort of ways 2 or 3 different evaluations. But I think it's also important to know what we want out of this as researchers. Is it just to promote ourselves and our research? I want attention and I want my paper to get attention. Do you want a better policy to come out? Do you want them to move your research into a program guidance? Do you want your research to inform financial allocations? Do you just want someone to pay more attention to evidence? And so knowing what we want out of it actually helps us move this thing along the way. So let me stop there, just by saying that research to policy is in itself, it's a journey, and we get out of it what we invest in it. I think we hold tremendous power. The research community holds tremendous power in our hands because knowledge is power. And we believe really strongly that using our place and our work and our position as researchers who have a lot of credibility in any world to make that world better is something that we can all do. We just remember the do's and don'ts a little bit, and we do what works. Not everyone can do everything. We do what works. I want to close with a failure story. We, and I personally, lost credibility with a government counterpart starting about in 2016. IFPRI's Global Hunger Index came out in 2016. I was supporting the media work on that. I did a media interview. It turns out that somebody saw that media interview and then called the person who was in charge of the nutrition program and gave them a earful. And that government counterpart didn't really want to engage very much with us for quite a while after that. But we got that information from other people that this was the reason that we were either not included in meetings or weren't being reached out to, et cetera. And it was fine, right? It was fine, but it was just a reminder that something as small as a piece of work that made somebody feel uncomfortable can come back to us in ways that change and reshape our relationship. There's a lot of sort of failure lessons in what we do as well, perhaps for another conversation. So thank you so much. I don't know if we have time for any questions or attractions. It would be great if we did. Thanks. Oh, great, 10 minutes. Okay. All right, I'm seeing hands already. So maybe we can do about 5 or 6 comments, questions, whatever you all have.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was really great. I'm Ashley Akason with USAID Advancing Nutrition. And I have a broader question around the role of experts. We're kind of in an information space now where nobody really knows what to believe. Public misinformation is kind of the order of the day. So just wondering, what are your thoughts and how are the groups you're working with dealing with this kind of, kind of attack on authenticity of sort of the scientific method and how experts come about our worldview, and how does that affect how we share it with policymakers?
Great. Other questions, comments?
Hi, I'm Julia. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. My question is more on in one country there are many nutritionists, for example, and nutritionists comes from different school of thought also. So when you were saying that the Ghostbuster thing, it's really interesting that you know what you're gonna say. Is it important for researcher to make a consolidation with the rest of the nutritionists, because if we have to do that, maybe we'll never really know what we're going to say. But at the same time, we also don't want to be, like the bullet come back to us because other researchers say that it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
It was a great, it was a great presentation. Thank you so much. And my question is, before formulating a research design, do you also think or explore that whether that can be translated into policy, or you just see a problem and then you build upon that, build up a research on that? Like, how is that? You spoke about aligning this, but still I'm thinking in reality how it happens. If you can little bit elaborate on that, it will be like.
Thank you. That's a really good question. So those were 3 questions. Let me try and respond. Oh, Rohini.
Hi, I'm Rohini from Nandi Foundation. So Purnima, thank you so much. I think the evidence to policy journey has been something that we at Nandi have been in the middle of, not terribly successfully, I have a feeling. But so we are an implementation organization, and there are 2 large data collection work that we have done, which we did because I think, first of all, our implementation experience, from that we found we needed that data, and if it didn't exist, we wanted to collect it, and we went and collected it. When it comes to the policy, and I think I learned a lot today from what you shared with us. The POSHAN story is definitely a success story. Another big success story I can think of in the Indian context is ASAR, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think these really stand out as exceptions. I am not aware of very many successful stories in the successful journey. And my question specifically is that from our experience also, if you look at collecting the evidence and then policy are 2 separate parts of the work, the collecting evidence seems easier. I mean, it's not easier, we all know, but it's kind of in your control. But the policy part is this animal that you don't know, where does it begin, where does it end, is it responding? You have absolutely no control. And organizations like ours, I think we then sort of, kind of lose interest, if I may say that, at that part. That's probably not doing justice to the data that we have collected, but I think we have a problem there, if there's any solution.
Yeah, no, thank you. So let me sort of work backwards then. In your work, Rohini, because you all have collected data on the nature of the challenge and the nature of the problems, you've played a bit of an agenda-setting role, right? Bringing data when none was available, creating conversations around the role of teenagers and nutrition for adolescents and just the lives of teenage girls in India. I think moving from there to building partnerships with a range of people who work at all different angles or from all different angles around that problem perhaps is something that we could discuss as to how to make that happen. I think we worked quite well together on the nutrition story at least. It is really easy to be disheartened because I think precisely we do pieces of work that we think are valuable and then it doesn't look like it's moving or people are paying attention to it. But I think what we've learned is that policy is actually quite welcoming and people who are setting, especially strategic directions, are quite welcoming of researchers engaging. But it is about finding the right moment and then finding the ways in which the knowledge community can come together so that everything sort of flows in a bit of cohesion. And that relates to the question that you asked in the back about what do we do when there's multiple nutritionists or people with different worldviews. It's really important we come together. It's really, really, really important. And in a sense, things like the Lancet Nutrition Series, all of these commissions and the Global Nutrition Report, et cetera, these are vehicles, in a sense, that are enabling our community to come together. Nutrition is a very exciting topic for a lot of people. I mean, like I said, a lot of the discourse on child stunting and what the determinants of that in India were not shaped by the nutritionists. They were shaped by people in the economics world who were looking at that as an outcome. And so building bridges, not just, building community not just among ourselves, but also with people who are working on our topic in other disciplines is something that, we've been thinking, we think is really important to do, and we have to make the effort. It's not going to happen without doing that. So in some of the work we did in India, we actually said, okay, let us build consensus. Let us agree on what we're going to agree on. And we actually did that recently with a large, sort of about 40 people who work in very different spaces on nutrition, and we laid out the things that we agreed on, and we laid out the things we didn't agree on, and that we thought needed more work. And it took a day, it just took a day of sitting together, but we had to be mindful to say that's what we were going after. The question you asked about how do you decide what method, I think, to use or the research question? Yeah, so when we do the research, do we think about the link to policy? So I think for some of the work that we do, we've interviewed the people in the policy community, and we've identified the questions that they are thinking about, and that helps us design the research questions. So actually listening to the policy community, not just to one or two policymakers, but what is UNICEF discussing? What are the state governments concerned about? What are people hearing from the ground? We try to do quite a bit of listening. And sometimes you just get an opportunity to do interesting research as researchers, and of course we do that. This is, it's very exciting to do research on new things, and then we'll figure out how to communicate that to policy at some point. So the last question, I thought, the internet is a wild place, right? And Twitter is even wilder than that. I don't know that any of us has solutions. I think, all we can do is come together as much as possible as researchers, be very clear about, what we mean when we say people on an expert committee, and do the best to just, get that stuff out there. But it's a really wild place. You're seeing all kinds of theories about all kinds of things. And people are quite uncomfortable around nutrition and food in particular. I think the public is uncomfortable with the fact that we do change our mind quite often. And we just have to keep explaining to people that that's science, right? Things do evolve and shape. What are we going to do with this policy community that we've mobilized around stunting with the paper that Jeff and Ed have written now? So that's something that we are discussing. Thank you, guys. That's a great paper. But it does it's made work a little messier, just a little messier. Great. Maybe maybe we can take two more. So Carol, okay, can we bring the mic here? Jody, you have the mic.
I do.
Go for it.
Jody Harris at the Institute of Development Studies. Just to say that it seems to me that what was underpinning a lot of your success and failure stories and a lot of the questions that people have been asking here are the power dynamics that sort of pervade both the policy process and pervade, which researchers' voices get heard in our little community here. And I wondered if you had any reflections on the sort of power dynamics that underpin all of that in this policy engagement work.
We may need to talk about that over tea, but I'm just going to say yes.
Yes. So my question is around the global policy environment. And maybe in India it's less important, but in a lot of settings, that global policy agenda is in parallel and not very well aligned with the domestic policy or financing schedule. And just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Maybe one last question? If both of you can be quick, that would be great.
Good morning, Hùng from IFPRI, Vietnam. My question to you is, the experience in India was very nice. So did you approach all these policymakers and partner as IFPRI, as institution, or did you do it through the national partners? I ask this question because in some of the context where we are operating, the policy message works better when it goes through an umbrella of national partner, but not international partner. Yeah. And even some of this data generated from international partners should be actually generated by national partners so that it can go through the system.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good question.
Actually, you have another question.
I'm Simeon from UNICEF. Mine is not a question, but rather a comment about the alignment. The reality is that alignment is not always possible, especially when you are dealing with other stakeholders or group of people who are taking a completely different stand. And what is important in that case, in my opinion, is to try to understand what are their motivation and what are the arguments that they're using. Not necessarily to align them, but to be able to use that, because we end up talking to the same policy community.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I think we can be explicit about that, Simeon, and in India we really have, that's one of the things we tried to do. You know, we put people in the room who are not just from the research community, but from the rights community, from the development partners, and we really tried to be explicit about what we agree on and what we don't agree on, so we create some kind of a consensus. But this is the reality of information flows and expert opinions and things like that, and I think we just need to be aware of it and find ways to mitigate. The question about national versus international research partners, at this point of time, 11 years in India, I don't even know what I am anymore. You know, some days I'm national, some days I'm international, some days I'm, you know, North Indian, and some days I'm South Indian. I live in the North, but my family's from the South. But you ask a very good question, and I think the only thing I want to say is we should use all positionality for the benefit of the issue, right? I mean, in our work, we have collaborated with several national institutions as well. We started our work with the Public Health Foundation of India. We worked with the National Nutrition Coalition, which brought together many nutrition partners. You know, that responds a little bit to Carol's work as well. What the global policy community does has been tremendously impactful, even in India. So one of the things that we did is both times that the Lancet Nutrition series came out, the Indian nutrition community and the nutrition policy community, we came together and it's, you know, it wasn't work that was initiated by me or anything the first time around, but looked at the Lancet Nutrition series and really walked through what do we agree with, what do people not agree with, what more is needed in the Indian context. So I think it is useful what the global policy community does, but there's no substitute for, you know, a group of people that cares about a particular context and lives and works there to come together and think about what that means. And the global community should think about how we support that, not how we just try and jump over local academic or local policy communities and engage directly with the governments. And Jody, I think I'll come to your question last. You know, egos and power are really a big part of this. And, you know, having moved, I think we've moved over the last 10 years to people not knowing anything about who IFPRI was and what we did when we first started our work on nutrition, to, you know, sometimes being, not all the time, but sometimes being the Ghostbusters in the room. So I think, you know, what we are thinking about is how do we use that positionality, right? I mean, if we are a trusted expert, how do we actually build the community of experts that we can, or of opinions and inputs that come into the room, so that anyone that is called by anyone in the policy community is sort of offering broadly similar kind of things. But this is also, it's the reality of human relations, and at the end of the day, the policy community is as human as the research community is, and today I think we're just part of that policy community in a sense. Yeah, so I think we need to be mindful of who we are, what our positionality is, what the rest of the world is, and yeah, it's fun. We have a lot of fun.
I get the feeling we could probably go on and on. There's a lot of enthusiasm on this topic, isn't there? But it remains for me, since time is passing, to say thank you so much for giving us a real clear set of ideas and principles on which to think about policy and bringing evidence to policy. So could you join me in thanking Purnima again?